All right, so it looks like we're live. I'm here with, is it Dawn of the Two Plebs Talk About the News podcast?
It is.
And we're going to talk tonight just about, I suppose, the political situation, how culture is evolving, and just kind of go from there. So I just want to give an introduction to your podcast. I think I became aware of it about 4 months ago, and it really is quite a clever and enjoyable daily podcast about politics. I watch it, I'd say pretty much every other day, and I think more people should know about it. If you're interested in politics, I definitely subscribe. Do you want to kind of give a little bit of a lead in to your project?
Actually, that was probably as good as I could do. There are normally two of us. It's I am Don the Pleb. That would be a friend of mine, Peter, and we sit and just generally talk about whatever it is that's important in the news, and we try to do it without any of the crazy political slant, and just give it the way it is. And after that, we tend to give our opinions on it.
I really like the laid-back nature of the podcast. I think it works really well. I mean, to tell you the truth, I've just been really allergic to politics since, well, I was kind of utterly bored with the last election. Not utterly bored, but I kind of felt that America was in a state that my vote really didn't matter, and not just because I live in the state that went to Hillary Clinton by probably 15 percentage points easily. It just was the fact that I didn't really understand what was at stake in the election, and that's kind of the situation I've been in politics recently. I'm not so sure I really understand the game that we're playing anymore. It seemed when I was a kid, it was much easier to figure out, okay, well, the Republicans want to have this kind of America, the Democrats want to have this kind of America. Now it just seems like we're kind of hurling towards some future, and neither side really has an understanding of what anything will ultimately come to. I don't know what your general take is, but
I think that's 20 degrees off the truth.
Okay.
The left seems to be pretty certain of where they want to go. It just sounds like hell. So, I mean, and the right seems to generally be hanging on by like the skin of its teeth. Like, no, don't do this one thing, and then everything will be okay.
Well, where does the left want to go? I mean, I don't know. To me, they have this image in their mind, but none of the stuff they say they want to produce is achievable. They don't have a magic way to fix healthcare. I mean, what they're promising people is that you're going to get American style service for, essentially no raise in middle class taxes, and
Yeah.
with European levels of access. That's just not true. So I don't know what to say. To me, I don't know. I'm struggling what it even means, because they can't deliver on that. They can't deliver on. I mean, half of their new transgender push doesn't even seem coherent to me.
So as far as things like, actually, healthcare is probably the best example. The left seems like only aware that there's no such thing as a free lunch when you get someone and you can just pin them into a corner. And then eventually what they will say is, well, of course we know it's not free, but like it's free at point of sale. Like, well, wait a minute. So then stop saying free healthcare, you lying bastard.
Every intelligent leftist will admit that the kind of tax rates you would need to deliver the kind of healthcare they're promising is something that most Democrats would not actually sign up for. So it seems that that acknowledgement requires them to, at some level, be dishonest.
Well, you say that, but California 2-3 months ago decided they were going to put in universal health care in California, and according to them, it was going to cost $400 million, and we were going to cover every citizen and every non-citizen, and it was just going to be a 15% payroll tax, and everything was going to be great. I took one look at that and went, you people are out of your mind.
This is the same logic that says they would have built the high-speed rail between Los Angeles and San Francisco like 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah. And from a lot of the same people, no less. But that they have failed dozens of times seems irrelevant somehow.
It's kind of strange. I was actually born and raised in California, and I haven't been back to the state for a really long time. I mean, as a resident, that is. Of course, I go back periodically to visit, but it's hard to get the sense. I mean, I worked there for a while at a temp job, and what struck me was just how much more congested the state was. But it's hard to really get like a barometer on what's going on there politically, since I haven't been paying attention.
I don't think most people would believe it. When we were talking about doing this, you're talking about, what it's like to be in California and conservative. And somewhere along the way, while thinking about this, it struck me that if you listen to people on the internet, the Young Turks have 3 million subscribers that are all hate watching them. If you live in California, you're surprised they only have 3 million subscribers, because there's a lot more people here who think exactly what they say. In fact, I know people who watch them and have demanded that they are a great source for news that I should watch in preparation for the channel, no less.
Wow, that's hard. I mean, you go to the Bay Area, you kind of see people who think that way, and I guess it seems, I don't know. To me, the Bay Area just seems like it's a powder keg ready to blow.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got all of these. I know a lot of friends I have. You got this sort of bubble of highly professional Silicon Valley people who are very well to do, and they live in sort of this illusionary symbiosis with a bunch of poor non-white people who resent them. And the leftist politics kind of like gives them this ability to kind of like put on the face of the rebel and go, yeah, we're pissed too with the man. But they don't realize that most of the complaints that these poor non-white citizens of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area have, the man they're thinking of is the very progressives that are so on the side of the downtrodden. It never made very much sense to me.
No, okay, so it kind of does, but you have to watch California politics pretty hard to see it. So, like, 2 years ago, we put in this huge tax on business, and it was supposed to be, everybody was going to something to do with their health care, and a lot of it went to the state. And unsurprisingly, Hollywood advocated for this thing day in and day out, sun up to sundown. And a week before it got signed, after the state Senate had passed it, Hollywood went in there and said, Jerry Brown, you are going to give us an exemption. And he went, okay. So, I mean, wow. If that's the kind of games that are being played here, then I'm not really surprised that that's how the state works.
I'll say this, for people who don't know California, Californians, they may be socialist as hell, but they are the biggest corporate whores ever to walk the face of this earth. They will do anything to get an additional Silicon Valley or additional tech company to move to the Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. And you might be thinking, oh, distributist, how can they need another Silicon Valley in a region that has so many you can hardly afford housing? Well, they still cut tax-exempt status, they still provide a bunch of funding, and they still approve land usage for like their 15th one. I don't know. Yeah. To me, it's to me, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, this is the thing, right? Is this sustainable? I guess this is this what defines the conservative mind? I mean, maybe it's a defect in my own mind that I look upon California and I'm like, this can't possibly last.
Well, so there's like two major things there that are worth talking about, and one of them is pretty short, so I'll start there. I think Thomas Sowell has the best description of conservative that I've ever heard, and it does make us all sound like reactionaries. And basically, it is conservative. The left have this huge goal, and they're on their way to their socialist utopia. The right are the disparate group of people who have fallen off at various points along the left's train.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, but it's kind of funny that. It's kind of funny. Modern conservatism seems, in some sense, more philosophically coherent.
Well, I try to. In the chat, there is the Liberal Sanity Project, who I try to talk to about these things on a regular basis. He's someone on the left that you can actually talk to. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, someone on the left you can talk to, in my mind, as sort of more of a reactionary, or I say I'm sort of a reactionary conservative hybrid. As someone on the left you can talk to means someone who's not going to be on the left in like 5 years.
That's funny. That's what I think about him too. But
yeah, like that's the pattern, because once you're talking to evil people like us, it means at some point you're not willing to go the next step to the left that the left is inevitably going to make. And at that point, you're going to become a conservative or a reactionary.
Pretty much. But it seems to be the way. Today, I think Dave Rubin put out an interview with a guy leaving the liberal bubble, and basically all he did to do that was drive around the country and talk to conservatives, and somehow we were all not Hitler.
There's going to be like the Searching for Bobby Fischer equivalent movie, searching for Adolf Hitler in the hinterlands of America. He must be out there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure they'll find one of us eventually, and we'll get pinned as Hitler. But in the meantime,
it's always the conservative currently in power.
Oh yeah,
it's Trump, right?
Oh, it's been on that subject. Considering what it is that I do, I have really been enjoying the sudden love for George Bush. Because I remember when he was president and he was double Hitler and he just hated brown people and he breaks to the corporations, every single thing you hear right now about Trump. But now, since he's not president, well, Bush not that bad of a guy.
he's downright nice. He was stable. He was an internationalist, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's that kind of incoherency that just makes me. I just can't stand politics for that reason.
I don't.
It makes talking to progressives really difficult, but even talking to conservatives sometimes, you get this. Well, I know that I see reactionary expat in the chat, and he'll certainly stand by me saying this. Is just it seems like the conservatives, the progressives don't. I mean, we're all kind of in this pattern, sort of like that movie Groundhog's Day, where we're like replaying the same dynamic over and over and over again. And the progressives don't seem to remember that they did it before and won, and the conservatives don't seem to remember that we've done this before and they lost. And I'm not so sure which one is the more grating. I guess sort of the perennial sore winner is sort of fundamentally more grating than the loser who can't catch a break, right? Sort of like in Jewish humor, the shlemiel and the schlemazel, right? But at the same time, just the fact that this has happened so many times and it's always the same thing kind of leaves me unable to process like really how I should be having these conversations where I have to pretend like everyone's reaction to Trump is somehow novel.
Yeah. I get the feeling that I am often too direct about this because look, I'm not the biggest fan of Trump ever, but I spend a lot of time on the channel being like, all right, this really isn't that bad. This is the 8 presidents before him that did it. It didn't matter then. It doesn't matter now. But it's in the sense of, the right losing and not getting anywhere now because, they had lost in the past. I think that's part of why we see the right the way it is today, right? Because, pre your New Deal era or your Great Society programs, certainly the right wing was not running around talking about how Social Security was a great thing. In fact, there are interviews on YouTube of candidates at the time and senators and things going, this is socialism. Keep it the hell out of our country. But we lost on that point, right? And Social Security is still here. So is Medicare. So is, lots of these programs.
And no amount of calling it a Ponzi scheme will actually get rid of the program,
right?
Even if it is a Ponzi scheme.
Exactly. And so I think this time around, what we're seeing is, like almost like a beaten dog that knows when the hand is raised, it can only push back so hard. Which is probably not a great view of a lot of conservative politicians right now. But you'll notice that when they didn't have any ability to do anything like repeal the Affordable Care Act, it was, burn this down. But as soon as they did, it was like, whoa, God, if we actually do this, people are going to be really mad at us.
Yeah, I know it becomes politically impossible for them to do that.
Yeah, I've given a couple of rundowns on the channel about why. I'm sure it'll come up again, but basically it's that we don't repeal. What is it? entitlements, right?
Yeah, that's kind of that in American politics. I don't think has there ever been a major appeal of an entitlement program.
Oh no, not that I'm aware of.
I think that's effectively has never happened in modern Western countries.
Well, so what is that rule? You reference it every now and again. Any
Oh,
organization that's not explicitly right becomes left wing.
yes. So I say that there's two fundamental rules, and I'll reference this in my next series of videos, ironically on nerd culture, but there's sort of two fundamental. Well, speaking, a reactionary expat who's in the chat had two rules that governed politics. Robert Conquest's two rules that governed politics were the first rule, which says that we're all conservative about the things that we know the most, which I think should actually be we're all conservative about the things that we love the most. And the second law is that all institutions that are not constitutionally conservative eventually become progressive or liberal.
Right.
And reactionary expats had a variation on this, which was something along the lines of the secret strength of the progressive is that no one actually wants to be living in under the rules and morals of the 19th century, but the secret strength of the conservative or reactionary is that at some level we will eventually have to.
Well, so I don't think I don't know that that's an accurate summation, if only because in a weird way, the progressives, maybe this is just horseshoe theory taken to the extreme, but they've really started advocating for a lot of the 18th century, say about 1774. but
what do you mean? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so they're for slavery, but they want it to be white people and not black, and they want it to not actually be slavery. It needs to be like this halfway thing, so they don't feel too bad about it. They definitely want segregation of all kinds. Free speech should really only apply to those that the king, as it were, would approve of. I mean, they're going back to 18th century too. They're just doing it before the American Revolution.
They're throwing liberalism under the bus.
Absolutely. And they're sort of, it's sort of like they learned from, I guess, mostly Marx. If you diffuse the responsibility at the top, there's no king to hate. So they don't set up anybody at the top that you can point at and go, that's the bad guy. But the same things, come rolling down.
Yeah. I mean, well, you start to have this thing too about how the alt-right and the progressives are both doing identity politics, and that makes them sort of the same. And there's some truth to that. Identity politics has become more politically salient, but to me, well, first of all, to me, that just means that identity politics, now that we're sort of entering a more diverse society, is going to become more politically powerful. And the two sides are using identity politics to come to, well, two very different types of worlds.
Yeah, they are. Well,
and this is the fundamental difference. It's like saying, both sides in World War I are using trench warfare. Right. And that's sort of the equivalent to saying both sides right now, the alt-right and the progressives, are using identity politics. So identity politics in highly diverse societies work very well.
So I think the problem is actually bigger than that, because in a lot of ways, at least the internet recognizes that this is an issue. There are things that the internet seems to refuse to recognize as an issue that are actually identity politics, but we do it in a very, very tacit and very positive sense, right? So there's a reason that Red Pill Black specifically most recently picked up all kinds of steam, and it was because she's a black conservative. Mm-hmm. And so all the conservatives went running and went, oh my God, it's a black woman conservative who says conservative things that, a whole lot of us on YouTube went, we've been doing that forever.
She's a totem against the progressive pushback.
Right. And as long as we want to engage in that sort of thing, I don't think we're ever going to, beat the identity politics out of the main discourse.
Well, I don't know. I think identity politics are just naturally going to become part of your discourse in highly diverse societies like the ones we live in. It's too useful not to use, right? unless you have some kind of advanced system that says, okay, nobody can use identity politics when they go to the election. But if one side can use them and use them in the way that the Democrats effectively have for the last 20 years, they're going to be winning, right? I mean,
well, so
they work.
50-50, I think we had the idea of no identity politics for about 100 years in this country. And I say that knowing
I'd agree with that.
I just said was during the middle of slavery, we did not have identity politics.
Well, I mean, in some sense, I agree with you, because I think most people would consider the African American population to be, in some sense, not actually America, or a different America. But inside white America, there was an agreement that identity politics of the ethnic variety, that new immigrants who voluntarily immigrated to this country would not be doing the kind of things that, well, not to put too fine a point on it, you see oftentimes, say, in the Somali community.
Right. That is generally true, though I would suggest that the Irish are the primary violators of this point, though along with them, the Italians did the same thing. The Germans didn't. The Brits didn't.
Well, there's reasons for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean...
there were explicit efforts to suppress the German identity across 2 world wars.
Pre-World War I, though, they weren't voting identity politics. So... I mean,
in World War I, I think there was explicit government policies to suppress their identity.
Oh, definitely. But we had in America
they didn't dare vote identity politics in World War I.
No, but in America, like 1810, I want to say, we had a pretty big rush of Germans, and they didn't seem very interested in identity politics. They got, I mean, they did what German Americans do, and they started building things. So, you know. But you know, the Irish, their success was somewhat limited as people who did. You know, they could take over a local community pretty hard, but after that, you know, it was something like 75 years after the first massive Irish immigration before they held like a Senate seat, because nobody was very interested in a guy who wanted to get up on stage and go, "The Irish deserve things" outside of a local community. And I think if we had stuck to that, we'd be in a lot better place right now.
But this is the thing. I mean, once the sticking to that requires some kind of political will that can be executed through elite culture. And the elite culture was certainly not willing to stick to that.
So, forgive me, but that's somewhat of a modern view. You know, there was most certainly a time where in this country, and it wasn't even all that long ago, right? You know, you could look back at the results of Pearl Harbor. Well, end result of that may be that we put Japanese in internment camps. The reality of the situation is basically what happened was we went, well, you struck American soil. Before that, we were just going to profit off this. But now you picked a fight with America. And despite that there was a draft, I mean, enlistment signups were hugely ridiculous compared to population of society.
Well, I mean, but this is after years of an explicit government effort to facilitate an American identity. At this stage, you could argue at this stage that there is a government effort to dismantle any notion of a unified American identity.
Oh, definitely. By 1942, I'd say we were already well on the path to being rid of the American identity, and certainly, you know, the keystone moment was the 60s. Almost no matter how you look at it.
Well, I mean, this is the question. I mean, what happened? I mean, it's not like they did this in the cover of night. They did this over the course of 50 years. And so, you know, even with seeing how the magician did all of his tricks, we're still wondering, well, what happened? I mean, something incredible happened during this time in Europe and in America. And I think that's the real $25 million question right there.
This is probably where I get to get my tinfoil hat, and I recognize that. But I'm somewhat of a believer in the Frankfurt School problem, right? You know, or at least it's colloquially known as that, even if it's not the actual Frankfurt School guys. But lots of communists came over and all that sort of thing, and they said, well, you know, this was a great system, just except for Hitler, whoever, and started working on, not because they were some plant from another country, but because they believed in the ideas, started working on propagating them. And 20 years is about the time that it takes to change, or at least imprint these ideas on 20 years worth of college graduates, right? Which is a pretty big voting block, specifically out of those that are in college. And then I think they just hit the jackpot with Vietnam, right? Because it was marketed as opposition to communism, and B, it was something that was treated so horribly in the press, regardless of what was going on, that America hated it. And so they could say, all that free love shit, to counter the war, as though somehow that was going to change it, and it got people to their side.
Now, I'll say this. No, I want to say something to support this theory, and then I'll say something not really to detract from it in a way that a progressive would detract from it, but more to detract from it in the way that perhaps a reactionary would detract from it. Now, I think that if a progressive were here, they'd probably push back and say you're peddling in conspiracy theories.
Sure.
I don't think this is the case. I think that it's disingenuous to say that this is the case. If you go back to all of the major thinkers that create modern ideas like white privilege, like microaggressions, like safe spaces, the people who write the textbooks of pedagogy of the oppressed, they're all Marxists. They all cite people from the Frankfurt School. They all have people from the Frankfurt School, and like Michel Foucault is primary sources. This intellectual idea obviously stems back to Marxism.
Yeah.
So the idea that saying that the Frankfurt School is a conspiracy theory, I think is just the left refusing to be honest about its own intellectual genealogy. That being said, there's one difficulty with saying it's the Frankfurt School, and that is a sort of a question of uniqueness. What is the unique situation? What was the unusual thing in human history? America from 1920 to 1975, that the period of American stability, right? Was that the normal thing, or was that the weird thing in human history? And has that brief period of stability, the unusual thing in human history? Because a reactionary would say, due to the incredible power and wealth of America, they were able to procure something, aka multi-ethnic stability, for about 80 years that no other nation could possibly do, because of their wealth, because of their technocracy, because of their political structures developed by WASPs. And eventually they ran out of the ability to continuously spend more and more money every year. And they ran out of sort of the WASP ideas that led to this innovation. And it was all running on fumes, right? And then the return, or the destruction of this, is actually a return to the normal human way of behaving. And the normal human way of behaving in a multi-ethnic society is to band together with your little ethnicity and play political games for the big political pot of money that we all negotiate for inside a common territory. So, I mean, I'm throwing out that reactionary theory, right?
That's not, I mean, to some degree or another, I have to agree that the sort of common state of humanity is one step above chaos, right? When we're in actual chaos, we're pretty unhappy about it, but we do kind of revert back to like, well, none of us are falling into holes every other day, so yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I would say to some degree you might be engaging in a little bit of revisionist history, because during the times that you're citing there for American stability, I think you have to look at that period somewhat favorably, and not to say that like the whole country was on fire, like when it wasn't even really on fire during the whole civil rights movement and Vietnam protest thing, but it wasn't doing that good.
Oh, it was a very favorable period. I agree with that.
Right. But during those, 20s to 70s time frame, we, I'll just give you post-depression is what you meant. But even then, we were sort of stable-ish, we were definitely prepping all of the things that came later, right? So during this time, while it is popular at the time, Eisenhower is sending troops to Vietnam, if only as advisors, but he's sending them. And while that's popular because Eisenhower, you get a lot of the other, the anti-war protest begins right then, right? There were some people who were like, oh, we shouldn't send troops anywhere for any reason. And I mean, this was the pacifist movement of France that showed up here after World War II, who said, if we would have just surrendered to Hitler, then he wouldn't have killed so many of us. And they didn't want any part of it. And we really did start all of our own fires during that time. They didn't quite get big enough until 10, 20 years later.
Well, when you say start, you mean start foreign military adventures? When you say started our own fires?
No, our political unrest, as it were, right? Because I mean, not that I can necessarily think of a popular war, but Afghanistan, 2003. Everybody was happy to see that country leveled to the ground across the country, and if you weren't, you shut your mouth, right?
Yeah.
But after that, once the war becomes unpopular, the people who wanted to say something at the beginning are the ones who start winding up unrest. And in a history repeats itself and we are just playing the same game over again, the comparisons between Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam in this way, and equally speaking, the intervening time periods are crazy.
Hmm. Can you elaborate? What do you think is crazy about them? I guess you think that they're crazy. The intervening time periods. You mean they're really good? Is what you're saying? I take it, or
well, so immediately post Vietnam, we have the '80s, and there's a little bit of an economic crash at the end of the '80s, but then that picks back up, and this is kind of like your post World War II time period. A little bit of an economic crash when everybody gets home, and then that picks back up. And then in, societally speaking, we're all still a little bit, with the American idea of we are Americans as opposed to whatever it is that we are. But during that time, small groups, both after World War II and after Vietnam, or both after Vietnam and immediately after the War on Terror, they start spinning up their own angry movements, which very quickly after start causing large destruction to the country. I mean,
you mean the '60s, right? Like this, right? I assume that's what you mean, right? Like
the '60s and Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are separated, but I mean, the '60s was just the '60s facilitated the beginning of a cultural change that had been in the works for a while in the academic levels, and then that trickled down and essentially. Well, I don't want to be too melodramatic about it. It ended the larger political project of what our forefathers would have considered America in a big way.
Yeah, certainly we would have to. Well, I would have to agree.
And Black Lives Matter is that's just the latest iteration of the movement that started in the '60s, right? Or we're talking about the late '60s anti-war movement.
Right. Well, so
broadly, right?
I'm not saying that they're even different. What I'm saying is that they specifically in relation to, I mean, if you're using wars as your, like, I don't know, your line in history that matters, right? So, the things that happened immediately preceding and succeeding Vietnam are the same things that are sort of happening around Iraq and Afghanistan, specifically Afghanistan, right now.
Yeah, I might agree to that, right? But I would say that I would argue that it's not a repetition. It's the left is taking the next step in its process, right? Vietnam dismantled part of these American institutions that made us see ourselves as a unified country, and now we're dismantling these institutions at an even more basic level.
Oh, definitely.
You wouldn't have people in 1972, like all of the players at a baseball game, just like not stand for the national anthem.
No, never would happen.
It's been very difficult to imagine in 1972.
Right. So I don't think it is. Let me just Apparently, there was a misunderstanding there. I definitely agree that it is worse now than it was then, but the tactical role of the situation, as it were, is like exactly the same, and it's
Oh yeah, we're replaying the same dynamic, right? We're replaying the same dynamic, and just like that, the conservatives are going to lose again. Right? They're gonna get some consolation prize. They're gonna kick some cans down the road, and then the left is gonna pick up a gain.
Yeah.
Whether it can do anything with that gain, it probably can't, right? But that's the game we're playing.
Well, yes, and it worries me that hypothetically the next Reagan hope we have is Trump, because we've got a long time before, realistically speaking, the Senate's going to, at some point during these 8 years, regardless of who the next president is, whether it's Trump or not, is going to go to the Democrats. And they are going to have that first year in office with a new Democratic president and control of the House and the Senate. And it will be the same sort of things that we did, immediately post Vietnam, and things that Lyndon Johnson got away with that he is somehow loved for, even though they're the source of a lot of our problems today.
It was something that Obama got away with, right? It's the next iteration down the loop, right? It's the next step.
Absolutely. And it's, I don't know. I think we're gonna. I'm torn about how panic-inducing I ever want to be about this, but it perpetually seems like the next major culture shift, and by that I mean, look at the country in the '60s. The next major culture shift ends the country. But so I'm not inclined to say that it'll be like, well, 2025, we're all going to be socialists. But Bernie Sanders is running as an open socialist and getting a lot of traction. So.
Well, the question is, the thing is, this can't go on forever. This is the thing. This is the ultimate thing about this whole way to do things, is that it just literally can't keep on going on like this.
No, but we live in a generation where everyone, well, not everyone, but the vast majority of the voting public is not really aware of socialism as a problem. And so they believe the things that everyone believes when socialism is ascending. And so either you think we've been going halfway socialist too long and we're about ready to, sink the ship, or you think the problem is that we haven't been socialist enough, which is what every socialist thinks.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. The problem with socialism is that, I know this is the thing. I don't know socialism being the problem. To me, I don't usually think the economic system is really the main issue. The main issue is sort of the cultural situation. If you can maintain a high trust society, then some of these programs could actually maintain themselves the way they did in Sweden. But eventually the culture kind of degrades under the weight of the system itself. And whether it's outright Venezuelan style socialism, that might just capsize the country immediately. But
so I hear this a lot, specifically from those that are, those that are supremely engaged in the culture war, like, Andrew Breitbart, right? Andrew Breitbart famously said, politics are downstream from culture, and, economics are sort of just a function of politics. So it seems reasonable along those lines that, to change the culture and that solves the problem. But I think these are symbiotic, right? So, and I think this, to a way earlier point, I think this is why we don't get rid of entitlements, because the Affordable Care Act was horrendously unpopular, but as soon as it passed, the country didn't implode. It was like, oh, well, this is fine. And that was a very economic principle applied to a culture who didn't want it, and now, to some degree or another, fights against its repeal.
Sure, that's the way of all social programs, which is why you're going to have creeping. You're going to have creeping and enlarging. This is sort of the thing. Like it in a lot of ways, all governments in the West have seen an increase in entitlement programs, because that's just what happens over time due to this, whether you see socialism as a problem or not, right?
Well, so I don't think that's true. Look at the times that social programs have gotten pushed through. They have been notoriously unpopular at the time of passing, and then unable to be given up within 5 years. And this is why I think they're kind of a symbiotic thing, because if we hated the idea before it happened, and then in less than a generation we thought it was irreplaceable, clearly the economic principles are having an output on the culture, even if they need to be forced the first time through.
So you think that the social programs sort of lead to the acceptance of more social programs? I guess in a sense that's true, right?
Well, so
I guess the question is how much can you really get by just going like I'm against big government,
right.
To me, that's sort of been this catch-all, and it kind of created this conservative movement that really didn't have anything to say, in my experience, and that's sort of been, I don't know, that's been a critique of the conservative movement of the Reagan eras, right? It's just like I'm a small government, conservative, and I'm going to cut taxes, then talk about cutting entitlements.
Right. Well, I think that's a modern era problem too, because if you go back even say 2 generations, what you find conservatives talking about is how freedom is a great thing, and how the ability to live your life without someone, in their own words, without someone like me infringing upon it, is the kind of thing that makes America great. And they were selling a vision, and we're not doing that anymore.
But man, this is the thing: is freedom the best thing? Is freedom the only thing you want to build your nation on? I mean, sometimes a lot of these conservatives, they seem to think that freedom, like, was the only idea that the United States ever had. And so you get sort of these situations where you're like, well, it's more freedom, but we've lost sort of the fundamental aspect of American culture.
So in a way, that is what I want the right selling, right?
I'll give you an example of one of the most major conservative, I mean, maybe someone's going to correct me here, but one of the most major conservative faux pas or destructive policy positions was, and this was done with the help of progressives too, so it's not completely the fault of conservatives, but the decision to deinstitutionalize the mentally ill. This has functionally created the homeless problem that I see in Seattle, and you probably see in the Bay Area or wherever you live in California, because they're all over California, right? But you have a bunch of insane people that comprise the majority of our perennially homeless population. And this was done because we couldn't express as a culture that, no, we can limit somebody's freedom because our culture has an idea of dignity and an idea of propriety that should take precedence over an appeal strictly to, we can't stop this person from doing what he wants to do, namely trying to medicate his schizophrenia with large amounts of opiates.
I think that was the conservative sales point, and I think the problem here is that it aligned with a progressive point, right? Because this is actually probably a really good example of why, in general, what I want is conservatives fighting for just raw freedom, because when they're fighting with opposition, what you get is the maintaining of the sort of middle ground. But in a case like this, where everybody agrees, what you end up with is something ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this would have been the time to hypothetically have said, well, look, we don't really want to limit people's freedom, but this guy really enjoys cooking the neighborhood cat, so maybe that's bad. Maybe we should do something more for him, as do whatever it is that we're currently doing. Though, truth be told, I think that was already a failure of the culture, because if you go back and you read 19th century works of literature about these sorts of things, what towns were doing at the time, maybe it was the church, maybe it was the family, but somebody was already taking care of them and the government didn't have to. However, after generations of the entitlement of not having to take care of someone, immediately dumping the problem back on the populace results in what we have now. And this is a lot of my problem with entitlements, because what you get is, well, we've gone this far, and so if we go back, then everything's going to be destroyed. And as long as we accept that, then what we're going to get is more progressivism.
Yeah, no, I see, but well, I mean, I sort of said this in a few of my videos, but I always think that, you know, I used to believe this sort of like liberty before all, and as an American, it's very tempting to believe that. But the more I read into history, it seems that the cultural practice of virtue ethics came first. And then the idea of liberty developed in these cultures that practiced, you know, like the Puritan cultures, have practiced this high trust, high focus on individual virtue. And then from that liberty came the wealth that essentially made the modern American super economy. And that's sort of the order of causality, in my opinion. I don't think that you could apply freedom to a culture that did not have the ethical perspectives that America has and expect to see a similar type of American individualism arise from that.
Oh, you're certainly right. I would suggest that we have been proving that everywhere in the world since about 1953.
But this fundamentally suggests that the problem has a cultural origin, in my opinion.
Well, and again, I have to ask. Well, all right. Let me just cede the point that it has a cultural origin. I don't think that disputes my point. In fact, I think they're sort of complementary.
Sure. And these things feed back, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the economic system, I think, more than most things, if only because once the country changes an economic system, it changes it for everyone. And so then everyone has to learn the new rules of the game, and the culture adapts to it, whether it intended to or not.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I think that. Well, I mean, I guess this I'd like to sort of finish this up as talking about what you think is going to happen in the future, right? Because I think I don't see any kind of conservative pushback coming in a policy direction.
No. I'm sure this is eminently cynical, which I probably shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. But we are either taking the fast road or the slow road to socialism. Personally, I think it is in my children or maybe their children's generation that we see something that everyone recognizes as socialism.
By socialism, do you mean Sweden or do you mean Venezuela?
More Venezuela.
More Venezuela. Like, yeah, but it's, yeah. So like the state's literally taking over industries.
Well, so, I mean, we're already doing it. And the question is how much we're willing to tolerate it. And since either A, Americans don't know that we're already doing it, or B, they don't care and think it's a good idea, we're on the slow path to Venezuelan style socialism. And mostly at this point, it's, how far can we push that out? At least in my opinion. Mm. And unless there's a huge conservative revolution sometime in the next 30 years, which would be amazing.
Given the demographic trends, I wouldn't count on that.
No, either.
And then this is the whole thing, right? If the destiny ultimately is some kind of strong arm socialism plastered over an endemically declining economy that has almost no growth, I think you're just headed for a collapse at an international scale. I think the progressive coalition will collapse. And when the progressive coalition in particular collapses, and I said this before, I think this is the sort of primary political moment of our generation or the next generation's life, is the collapse of the progressive political coalition internationally. Once that coalition collapses, then I think our whole political order will be remade. And you could very well just have super right-wing groups emerge overnight.
I don't know that would be any better, because in those situations, it's right-wing authoritarians that
Well, I'm not saying better. It's gonna be totally chaotic.
Right. It's going to be madness.
It's gonna be a collapse. It's gonna be a collapse, right? But what it isn't going to be is, I mean, what's the way out of Venezuela style socialism? Collapse, right? But when Venezuela has a collapse and people are starving and children are dying of malnutrition in the streets, is you look at the numbers and you see that the Venezuelan government has been essentially covering this stuff up for the last 5 years.
Oh yeah,
that happens in America, and the world's going to go nuts because America is the one that has all the weapons, and it's the one making all the guarantees to Taiwan and to Turkey and to the neighbors of Russia and every other security concern from here to Timbuktu. And once that happens, once people are starving in the streets here, and there's a coup brewing, as there probably is already in Venezuela.
Oh, certainly. In fact, I think they started
then
already.
it's there's all sorts of things that can happen that you never thought would be possible.
So I think it will be a slower issue than that, right? So we don't often have major world powers travel down the socialist road and then implode. So I don't have any good historical precedent, but as we get more that direction, we are going to, as with lots of socialist governments, either we will invest everything in the military, and that's why people will be starving, or we will invest nothing in the military. And so it won't so much be a major collapse in that sense as it will be, the current Russia-Ukraine thing. Trump approves weapons to the Ukrainians, will immediately stop happening. No POTUS would do that. Russia takes the Ukraine. Mm. And it will be that kind of small step that will be the legitimate beginning of the end.
Well, yeah, I think I would say the beginning of the end is sort of already in progress right now. The question is whether it happens in our lifetime.
Yeah.
I think as soon as the Progressive Coalition cracks, that will be the end.
Maybe. I don't think, well, I don't know. The EU's working hard at falling apart, so it's hard to say whether or not that will do it. Because it seems like a lot pivots around them and Trudeau at the moment. So either one of them having serious problems could be the beginning of that. But I think we will dodge the bullet here in America because we're very good at doing that. Both culturally and economically speaking, we run ourselves into the ground pretty hard for anywhere between 20 and 50 years. And then somebody comes along and goes, we need to reform everything. And I think we've got at least one more of those in us before anything truly terrible happens, which was why I think it's my children or their children's lifetime thing.
So you think we got another Reagan stopgap for the process?
I think we do. And I mean, it's easy at everyone who was there 5 minutes before the collapse every time probably thought this, but there's still enough of a push. The counter, not to get all Paul Joseph Watts on anybody, but with parents who are running around as social justice warriors, white people are evil. A lot of the next generation is going to grow up, as studies already show, saying that they are more progressive than past generations. So that leaves us an out for at least one more.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess we're sort of leaving out a hand accelerating decline. And, none of us knows whether we can keep on pushing this forward or whether Bill is going to become to do during our generation. But part of me is just really tired of this cycle. I really like your show, but I just can't watch politics anymore because it all just looks like marionettes dancing on the ends of strings, playing out sort of another political cycle. And I already know the lines that come out of the Republican marionette. I know the lines coming out of the Republican Judy, and I know the lines coming out of the Progressive Punch. And I know that he's going to whack Judy over the head with a stick again. And then, 5 minutes later, another, conservative Judy is going to emerge out from the left-hand side of the stage. And so I just to me, I know how this game's played, and I want something. I want the cycle to sort of end.
Uh, I don't blame you in the slightest. That would be. I think our lifetime was a horrible time to be interested in politics.
I say this
In that
now.
sense.
When the collapse comes, you're just like, oh, things were so much better in the 2010s and 2020s.
Right.
Oh, remember dumb internet memes and 4chan frogs and
Yeah.
remember Taylor Swift and Kanye West. Oh, those were the days.
Well, and that is look to our various other countries around the world and look at what's happening to them. That is exactly what they're doing, right? So as much as everyone I know that pays a lot of attention to politics is like, just burn the fucking system down, enough of this, meh. I'm like, you look at what's on the other side of that, because that end, we should definitely, like, as bad as any of this may or may not get, as repetitive, as terrible, what's on the other side is always worse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But maybe I see some hope, right? I always think that there's a little bit of a hope in the reactionary view of a cyclical history,
Sure.
because technology. Are you aware of the Mencius mole bug, like oscillations of history, where like technological progress comes in, elevates humanity really, really quickly, and then because of that, humanity gets more and more and more decadent. But the
Yes.
decadence always exceeds the technological and wealth growth by a little bit. So
Yeah.
society slowly does this arc and then collapses. And of course, technological progress has been so steep and our wealth growth has been so enormous, we're in for a particular radical oscillation. But part of me sort of wonders that if we go through a civilizational oscillation, if humanity might not learn something incredibly profound this time,
Uh,
if it might not fundamentally come to, the great saints that emerge out of the collapse, that sort of inevitable, will teach something to humanity, and will forge a new Christian civilization that will, in some sense, be different. Will be fundamentally different than anything that's come before them, and represent sort of a new stride. Maybe we'll understand the cycle better, but maybe we'll understand human nature at a much more real level. I'm not the only one to look back on things like Dostoevsky and
no,
um, Charles Dickens and go, man. And I know some of it's romanticized, certainly. Some
sure.
of George Eliot and some of Jane Austen is just pure romanticism, but some of it's just realism. Some of it's just the fact that I think in those times people had more human interactions, and it's really hard to put your finger on. And I think in some sense, I'm really at this point really plagiarizing from a thinker called Mark Citadel, um, which some people in the chat should look up. But he's right, and so we were the inheritors of this beautiful Christian tradition that was one of the most human, one of the most profound of all history, and we're sitting here in sort of a cardboard, disposable, consumeristic universe. Maybe we'll learn some way to bring that human reality into a technological society on the next iteration, right? And that sort of gives me great hope, I guess. It gives me. It might not be bad. It might be a learning experience for us civilizationally.
Two things. Culturally, in large scale, learning experiences are painful for humans.
Yeah.
Every time that we've gone through a big learning experience, it sucks. So I absolutely appreciate your hope, but I am ever cynical about this. And I look at, I mean, there are things I have learned from you that I have successively gone and looked up and gone, wow, he's totally right about how badly we do revisionist history kind of things around here. And that we are so skilled at that makes me wonder if we're ever going to stop repeating the cycle, because we learn all of these things and then we decide 10, 20, 50, 100 years later, you know what? We didn't like learning that. We rewrite history and we say it was all terrible.
That is like the most basic red pill, is that this civilization has made discrete decisions to unlearn critical truths about the human reality.
Yeah.
And once you discover that our society has intentionally unlearned things about the nature of humanity, you begin looking back on history as in a totally different way. And I don't know, you sort of clear the sand from your eyes, and you see a new world, you see sort of a clear world, but you also see a more tragic world.
You do.
I don't know. It's sort of fundamental. I do watch. You've heard of everyone has. You've heard the YouTuber ContraPoints.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I sub to him, and I sub to all of the people who are sort of in his little like transgender circle.
Yeah.
And I watch their live streams constantly. And I had one like a few days ago when I had a spare moment in between doing my work over lunch. I had sort of like an alt-right live stream on one screen, and then I had like a transgender like Christy Winters live stream on the other one, and I lined them up, and I'd watch like 5 seconds of one, and then I'd play 5 seconds of the other, and it was amazing. The contrast between how the alt-righters talk to each other and how the sort of transgender people talked about to each other was just so radically different, right? Like the alt-righters talked like they were sitting in front of a map of the United States and the map had a knife in it. And you could say maybe they're LARPing, they're pretending they're going to take over the world, whatever. But they're talking about like whether it's LARP or not, they're talking about something that's outside themselves. The transgender crowd was all just bitching about themselves. They didn't say a single thing that wasn't totally inflexive and inane. And these people were getting way more money. I don't know. I have my complaints about the alt-right, but it's amazing to see progressive culture in its current state. I'm endlessly fascinated about how self-interested it is. I can't believe it exists.
It's easy to sell, right? And it's unbelievably easy to sell because if you want to talk about doing something serious over any lengthy period of time, you very much have to address facts, be willing to admit that you're wrong, re-examine your ideas, all these kinds of things. If you are solely based around this is what I feel, you never have to do any of that. And self-reflection is one of the things that we hate the most as a species. So,
oh yeah,
I watch that sort of thing and I think a lot of the same things you do. Jesus, this is unbelievable. And then oftentimes what I end up doing is going, thank you, parents, because
I've literally spent like 5 minutes staring into a ContraPoints live stream with my mouth like just open, going like, how are 300 people watching this and sending in $100 super chats?
Yeah. Oh, I am not.
I can't. It's like watching a plane crash. I mean, I don't have a big problem with ContraPoints as a person. I'm sure he's a very nice, or she is a very nice, whatever. That person of ContraPoints is a very nice individual. But I can't understand this culture. I just can't.
I spent a lot of time for about a year and a half before I started this YouTube channel. I was watching a lot of that, and I was having that problem constantly. And one of the things that I think got me to start this channel is that eventually I went, I'm glad that I don't understand this. And it was I don't know, sort of peace giving in that sense. Is I don't understand, and I like to understand things. So it was a hell of a problem. And then at some point I went, well, I don't want to. So let's stop now. I'm glad I don't get it.
Do you ever read C.S. Lewis? Like, not just The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't know. Maybe you're a fan of C.S. Lewis or not?
Intermittently, but I'm reading so much these days.
Oh, yeah. No pressure, but I wanted to kind of quote from him. Well, not really quote, but reference a semi-fictional work of his called The Great Divorce, in which C.S. Lewis describes basically he describes the boundary of heaven and hell and the people who are looking from heaven to hell and the people who are looking from hell to heaven. And these souls that are in this purgatorial state where they could be sort of in either one, uh, sort of one of the in C.S. Lewis's metaphor, he has sort of he has George MacDonald sort of playing the role of Virgil, from the Divine Comedy, where George MacDonald was walking C.S. Lewis through heaven and hell and explaining it. And he says that the reason why the souls in heaven quite can't understand hell is because hell is almost it's very nearly nothing, right? And so you keep on looking at the souls for hell, going like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Why aren't they just going to heaven? And it's because there literally is no reason, because there's nothing there to actually happen. Maybe I'm looking at ContraPoints, wondering like, where is the depth? Where is the meaning? Where is the truth? And I'm puzzling, but there's nothing there, right? There's nothing there.
That is.
Okay, I got a super chat here. Oh, so go ahead. Yeah, pardon me.
Oh no, definitely read the super chats. They're important.
Oh, so Samurai Squirrel says, "Hey Senpai, can you give me a list of books to read somewhere? Art, philosophy, NRX, etc." I have just reorganized my bookshelf, and I am definitely going to make a video where I categorize my books. I really wanted to do it before Christmas, but it's just not going to happen. But I'll definitely make that video. Thank you very much for the super chat. Yeah, so that's sorry, I totally cut you off because of the super chat, but
no,
that's sort of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, when I look into the progressive and I get mystified, maybe it's just because I'm looking for something that's not there.
You are, and this is way back to the cultural discussion. The things that, generally speaking, people on the right value, the left don't, and the things that people on the left value, the right don't. And so when we look at each other, neither one of us seems to really see the other one as even remotely rational. This is how everyone can claim everything they think is common sense, and usually none of it is, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's, I think that, not to go all Alex Jonesy or anything, but if anything in this world is going to cause us civil war-ish problems, it's going to be that kind of thing, right? Is, the things that California does. Oh, this is no longer my country.
Yeah, well, I don't. No, I understand as a Catholic, America was never really my country in the way it was for people who come from a WASP background or come from an African American or Native American background, which I consider to this day to be the three native populations of this country. As a WASP, I'm fundamentally an immigrant, and I will always be an immigrant. So I understand that, but even that, I feel that compared to previous generations of Catholics, when I look at the baby boomers in my parish, I feel a lot less American than they do. And that's not just me. That's like every younger millennial in that area.
Oh, that's definitely true. As much as I will not run around supporting Catholics on average or anything. I gotta say they are way more than most things. The whipping boy that we now don't even talk about, right? Like now we mock the evangelical Christians in a abstract fashion. But if you ever said Catholic, people would quote Carlin at you till they were blue in the face.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think Catholics have come in for a lot less criticism than the evangelicals have. But I think that's just because people perceive Catholics as being sort of an ethnic religion still.
Maybe you might still be getting away with like the Irish and Italian Catholic thing, and we might tacitly accept that as a society and just let it go. That might be the case.
Yeah, I mean, the Cardinal Law passed away today, and that may have been the moment where Catholicism took a big step back in this country, right? The sex abuse crisis.
Yeah. I won't argue because I am certainly uninformed.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could give you. I've been talking way too much for a conversation stream. Maybe I could just just let you talk a little bit about what you see as being sort of the future, what you think people should be talking about. How you see things develop going forward. I mean, how, as someone who, like myself, who has been not paying attention to politics like Trump at all. How do you see the legacy of Trump forming up as someone who talks about politics more or less on a daily basis?
As of today, a lot better. If you asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd have said probably not all that good. And all things considered, it's still probably not going to be all that good because we're going to paint him in the same way that we paint conservatives always, except that for once, there's going to be someone who is wearing the title conservative who really does say things that are pretty culturally outrageous to us, right? So he's probably going to go down for that more than anything else in history. But one of the things that I've come to realize politically is that we won't even see the full extent of the things that, for example, Barack Obama did to this country for another 10 years. You know, the panning out of what he did is only just begun. So really, like, I watched everybody do this with Obama, and they're now doing it with Trump. Oh, when it was Obama, it was the right saying he's going to be the worst president in history, and now it's the left saying that about Trump. And the reality is, none of us know, though already things that are being released about Obama aren't that good, and already things that are being released about Trump are, I mean, for those that control the zeitgeist, it's terrible. So I think he'll be panned for a long time, and it might be 30 or 40 years before someone really goes out of their way to acknowledge that he did something good, one way or the other.
Do you think he's going to change the immigration policy of this country in any long-term sense?
Yes, in any meaningful way, maybe. I doubt it.
I mean, that would be the legacy if he could achieve it, right?
Oh, definitely. If he could get us back to a meritocratic immigration system, he would have changed the face and even to some degree the culture of the country for generations to come. But I don't think he's going to get it. Considering what generally happens with Congress in a president's first term, the Democrats are going to shut him down everywhere. They're not going to have it. So, as soon as they get a hold of Congress in any way, shape, or form, even just enough to block new bills, Trump will never get anything done.
I guess maybe I don't understand the constraints because I haven't been paying attention, but I'm actually surprised he hasn't pushed harder for that.
I think
how prominent it was in his actual campaign.
I think he thinks this is the long game, and I think that's the wrong way to look at it. But I mean, everything seems imperative when your guy has the power and can, your guy has the power and can do hypothetically whatever he wants because, well, get it done now. But I think he is looking at this more in a gamesmanship sense, right? So you don't, the finale fireworks always have to be bigger than the opening ones. So if he gets taxes done now and he over the next year gets funding for the wall, and then in the third year we start construction of the wall, and then in the fourth year he reforms the immigration system, even if he goes out after that as no longer president, he ran it like he does marketing wise in a upswing the whole time. Just not sure he's going to get it.
Yeah, I mean I guess that's sort of the question, right? I mean, it's always really difficult. Well, maybe if I could ask you, what do you think? Do you think there's going to be a culture war pushback in California or in any of these progressive states?
There already is.
Really?
Yeah, it's tiny as culture wars start, but to the idea of how they end up growing to be a thing, the state of Jefferson guys have been around here since the 60s or something like that. Screaming that San Francisco is a bunch of lunatics and they want nothing to do with them. And this used to be so much as when I was a kid, which was all things considered not that long ago. But 20, 25 years ago, the state of Jefferson guys were nutbags and just shut up. This is California. Now, once you hit about the mid-mark of the state, right about the halfway line, just above Sacramento, you start to see state of Jefferson signs on the freeways, on the fronts of stores. It's a growing counterculture movement.
That's really interesting because I think that a new sort of conservative or reactionary movement is going to have to be, to a large degree, led or guided by people who were born or spent a good amount of time in these highly progressive metropolitan areas because they understand progressivism and they understand what's happening. They understand the urgency of the issues at stake. I think maybe we'll see something new coming out of California.
I think you're right, and I think the guy too. There's a guy on YouTube that he lived in Soviet Russia during communism, and now he goes and talks to like communist millennials and all that. So Vladimir Jaffe, I think, and I think that when we start designing assuming that the right designs this sort of counterculture movement, we need to go really watch that guy because he speaks to them about things that they understand. Now, he doesn't get any traction because they're 18-year-old kids who think communism's great. So you couldn't tell them anything. But older communists who meet him tend to have problems talking to him. And that's the kind of trip up we would need. And I think that goes right along with what you're talking about is, I have seen the terrible thing that is what we're talking about. And this is why what I'm talking about is better. And I think that's where we would actually get some traction as some sort of counterculture movement. And we're not doing it, in my opinion, right?
What do you think we could do to improve?
So I really only have some kind of abstract things because I've been working on this myself for about 2 months and I'm coming up short. But we need to talk to people on a level they understand. And I think that the problem with that for conservatives is we like to do that in like town hall meetings where it's very easy to whip up a mob and be angry at someone. And I think really the way we do it is just straight up take a cue from the social justice people. When they want to engage in politics, it's our job to be calm, to be courteous, to talk to them about what it is that they care about and try and explain to them why even, their demand for their feelings would be better served by conservatism as opposed to progressivism. And now, do I have any great, roadmap of how to get that done? No, I've done it successfully maybe twice in my life. So that's not, I'm probably not the guy to talk to, but it's some of the only success I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
I think people. Sorry, go. I was going to say. I think a lot of people who are on the more reactionary side, they think they see disaster coming and they go into sort of full warrior mode.
Yeah.
But disaster, at the point where we're talking about it, like on YouTube and having a conversation, we need less warriors and more ambassadors, even if collapse is coming down the line.
Right.
It's something that we're not going to fight our way out of without having a lot more friends.
Well, so it used to be even kind of a conservative maxim. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? And we seem to have abandoned that. And to some degree, I'll even blame Reagan for this, right? Like, don't get me wrong, good, strong leadership. But a lot of what he did is just go, I don't care about what the hell you have to say because I know you're wrong, which did work for him, but we keep trying to emulate that, and I think the culture has moved on from where that would be successful. So now we have to play almost like the back foot game to get people to really engage with it, even the ideas that we're talking about, let alone us. And so we end up in this position where we're, the hero of the right for a long time has been Reagan. And so we, good, strong, conservative cowboy hat told the Russians to go pound sand, right? And what we keep trying to do that to people who are in an emotional mob. So we've got to separate them from the mob, right? Like if you're having this kind of chat with someone on the opposing side, never more than 5 people at a time, which is like definitively the long road because it's going to take you a while to get them to move anyhow. But if you're aggressive with them, now you're playing on their turf, right? Because they see that as anger, and anger is an emotion that they can deal with. They'll quote Star Wars at you. Anger leads to hate. Okay, I'm sure that's functional to the discussion, but it plays into their game. If you're calm, and if you watch really calm conservative speakers, they get screamed at by a majority who don't know what to do with them. And then every single one of them at the end of the talk says, yeah, I had 50 people come up to me and said, I've never thought of it like that before. Thank you. So we need to get rid of the conservative firebrand as a whole. And the base is not going to like it because we went through a little bit of this with like George W. Bush trying to not be so firebrandish, and everybody called him weak. This is where the term rhino came in and all that sort of thing. Don't compromise on the principles, just compromise on how you talk about them.
Well, we're fundamentally a counterculture at this stage, and being a counterculture, you can't just put people in their place. Right. I think we need a lot fewer conservative Sam Adams and a lot more conservative Voltaires and Swifts. I mean, you can be courteous and still be satirical, right? We need to move from shitposting and get it more to high satire.
Oh, wouldn't that be the dream? But, man, I think culturally we're losing the idea of high satire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is going to cause us a problem in going down that road. What was that? The blog that mocked feminism that just shut down like a week ago, said we can't parody feminism anymore.
Oh, yeah. They encountered the ultimate pose law, didn't they?
Right. And so, I mean, as long as that's the case, high satire is way out of reach.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's an opportunity. I mean, smart people are always looking for things to challenge them. And there's always a way to mock that the emperor had no clothes, right? Like the Gaius Petronius from Nero's age, always cracking wise about the emperor in full view of the emperor because the emperor couldn't understand how it was being made fun of.
This is true. Maybe for that we should look to, of all people, Owen Benjamin, because I think he's the best I've got off the top of my head of people doing that right now. So, I mean, maybe it's not the end result, but and the more time he spends on Crowder, the more aggressive he gets. So, that may or may not hold true.
I mean, maybe Owen Benjamin with a little bit of Sam Hyde mixed in for good measure, just to get a little twist of lemon in there.
There we go.
Well, man, I hate to say it, but I'm already over time. Sorry, I'll have to probably bring this to a close. I want everyone here on the stream, though, to go and sub to the, if you're interested in politics, that is, go sub to the Two Plebs Talk About the News channel. After the stream is done, I'll put it in the description once it's finished uploading. But it's a really good show for people interested in politics. Did you want to say anything just to close us out? Thanks for coming on.
Oh, man, are you kidding me? Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great shooting the shit. I didn't really have anything to talk about, but we found like tons of stuff that was really interesting nonetheless.
Well, I'm glad because I was short myself. I am usually I am used to being in adversarial places, which might be why I'm good at adversarial things without being a dick. But it's odd to not have to have prepared for an hour and a half to talk to someone and just had a decent conversation at the end. It's been great.
All right. Well, thanks again. I have to go now, but it was really great having you on, and hopefully we can meet up some other time when I have a little bit more time to do live streams.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. I'll see everyone soon. I'll probably have a few more live streams this week, so stay tuned. Also, someone asked me, oh, why are these live streams getting moved around so much? Well, my schedule's getting moved around a lot because it's Advent, it's Christmas time. I have a spare hour here and there. These things are naturally in negotiation, so you'll have to just forgive me. But again, I'll just thank Two Plebs for coming on, Don from Two Plebs, and everyone sub to their channel. I'll have to say goodnight now, okay?
Night, everybody.
Night.